Hi there, I'm Sean C. Davis, and this is a tutorial on building a static API with Gatsby. I'm guessing if you're here, you know, one, a little bit about Gatsby, and two, probably a little bit about static APIs. If not, there are links to both of those below where you can get some more information and get up to speed because we're going to dive right in. The other thing I'll mention is that I've also previously written an article and recorded a video on building JSON pages from a markdown file source within a Gatsby project. That's kind of the foundation for the approach we're taking here. And so I would say start with me here. Let's go through this project. But if you're having trouble following and you want more background and you want to kind of like dig into all of the setup, then go check that out. Otherwise, we're going to assume you can either follow that or that you've gone through that video so we can move kind of quickly and basically build out this static API. What we're working from in just a few minutes is the source of that markdown Gatsby JSON pages tutorial. So that's where we're going to start. All I've done from where we left off in that tutorial was add some new data files. So in that particular example, we had our data source was source/content/posts, and we had a couple posts in there. I've replaced those with these examples that I've used across all of the static API tutorials. And these are individual songs, which we're calling earworms. They're songs that get stuck in our head, and we're dropping them in here as markdown files. If you've watched other static API tutorials or read the tutorials, you'll notice that these differ a little bit. One, they're markdown files and they're not YAML files. And while we could use YAML files, certainly within Gatsby, it's got the support for markdown is quite a bit stronger. So I figured let's just use that because we've already got a foundation there. The second thing that's a little bit different is that instead of using ID, I am using song ID, and I'll show you why. It's because ID is a reserved field for nodes in GraphQL. Okay, well, let's actually do something instead of you just having to stare at this screen where nothing is happening and you can't see me or anything like that. So yeah, let's do something. All right, I'm gonna boot up the server here by running yarn clean and yarn develop, the semicolon in the middle. If you prefer to use npm, that's fine. It's npm run clean, npm run develop, assuming that you are using the Gatsby default starter or working from the repo that I've shared in conjunction with this. All right, now I'm going to run this and it's going to fail. There it goes. Okay. The reason it failed was because in that previous example, I had tied the data source to content/posts. That doesn't exist anymore. So now I'm going to come over to Gatsby config and know that I have to change my file system source here. And the reason I know this is because we can look down here at the error and it says the path passed to Gatsby source file system does not exist on your file system, and pointing to source content posts. So instead of calling these posts, we're going to call them earworms and we'll point them to the right directory. Okay, if I save that and then I come back and run the same command again, fingers crossed, it might actually work this time. And look, it seems like it's doing something. I'm going to come up in my browser and impatiently refresh until I get something. There we go. Okay. So I noticed that I've come to localhost 8000/__graphical. This is this graphical interface. If you watched the previous tutorial, you've seen this before. If you've worked with Gatsby, I'm sure you've run into this previously. I'm going to delete all of those comments and then let's go ahead and query what we have. This is all markdown remark. And notice that this gives us 3 nodes and we have 3 nodes over here. Now, if you have other markdown files in your project, you're going to want to use the filter function here so that you can scope your responses to whatever you find in this particular directory. You could do something like filter, and we would say file absolute path, and we could pass it some regex, which maybe looks like source, content, earworms, and then I should still get what I now I'm getting everything that I had before. Because notice if I change this to say posts, I'm not going to get anything. So you could do that. I'll leave it there for now. I'm not going to put it in the Gatsby node file just to keep things simple. And then if we recall, our data is actually going to be wrapped up in a front matter object. And then we're going to look for each of these keys. Now let's touch back on this song ID idea. Notice that when I first ran this query, I had this ID object. That ID it's specific to the record. It's generated at runtime by Gatsby. And I could theoretically put an ID field in here because it's all scoped within front matter. So that would be okay. And it should work. It should work without any consequence, really. I try not to do that because it feels it's not going to necessarily run into any conflict, but it feels kind of icky. It feels like, I don't know, if I put ID in here, it feels kind of risky. You could certainly do it and it would be okay. I think I said earlier, you can't or you shouldn't. That's up to you. I'm not going to because I like to reserve ID because ID is actually meaningful in this particular case. Whereas when we've done other tutorials in, say, 11D or Jekyll or whatever it might be, that there is no ID associated with that data. The data object is the data object. Here, the data object gets all wrapped up in GraphQL queries, and so ID is actually a thing. So I'm just going to call it song ID, just to keep it simple. And then we'll say date, and let's go ahead and format the date. This is a nice function we can run out of the box with Gatsby. And I don't know if this is, that's the format we're going to use for now, which matches what we see here. And then title, artist, and Spotify URL. There we go. And we now see we get all of our songs, all of our earworms. I want to show you real quick that notice if I comment that out and I just run date, that even though all I had was that 2020-03-29 date here, that it actually gets formatted into this full date string. And that is why I ran format string, so that I get the object I want. Now, if you're returning it in an API, yeah, maybe you want to offer a few different varieties. That's totally fine. We're going to keep things super simple here so you can just get up and running and then you can customize it to your liking. All right, we have the query set up. We've got the content we need. Now let's go shove that logic into our Gatsby node, which is where we had done all this work in the previous tutorial as well. So we see we've got a little bit to change here. First thing is, why don't I'll change the front matter that I'm pulling back, and I'm not going to use HTML or I'm not going to use the file absolute path anymore because we're going to use the song ID to generate the file name. So what we're going to do first here is we're just going to generate one index file, and that's going to be the file that is the conglomerate of all of the song objects shoved together. So to do that, let's keep moving through here. And I suppose I'll back up just for a second here. Notice that we're in the Gatsby node file. We're running we're using the onPost build hook, which means that this is running only after the Gatsby builds the project. And so we're not actually hooking into the development server or anything like that. We're just physically writing JSON files to the public directory. There's way more information on that in the Markdown JSON pages tutorial. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check it out. Otherwise, let's keep moving. So when we come down here, we say post path, and I'm just going to kind of update these on the fly. So I'll call this earworms path, and we're going to put it in public earworms. You might want to put it in something like public. In fact, why don't we do that? We'll just say public API earworms. And then we're going to say our, actually, I need to call these, I need to use an earworms alias up here. Otherwise, those would come back as posts. So change both of these down here to earworms. All right, so now my earworms variable is going to be result.data.earworms. And then this is basically, it's going to result in what's shoved in here. I'm going to take this one step further because I actually don't care about anything that's outside the purview of front matter at this point. And I know front matter is going to be there for the data that I have. That gives me the liberty to say node.frontMatter, and I can show you the difference here in a sec. So in fact, why don't we stop there and take a look, and let's see where I am. Yeah, okay. Now let's log out earworms. In fact, let's log out earworms without front matter and take a look at what we get. In fact, I'll do json.stringify so you can see a little bit better what's happening. I'm going to kill my development server over here, and I'll run clean again just so we can see what's up, and then run build. Now, as this is happening, we should get a bunch of text output in the console. And there we go. Okay. So notice that we've got an array. In fact, why don't we grab this and we'll clean it up so you can take a look at it. All right. And we'll make this a JSON file. Whoops. Here we go. Okay. So this is what got logged to my console over here. And notice that it matches pretty much what we see here, except it's an array and it has extracted out these front matter objects because it's just given us the value of node. And that's why I was suggesting we take this one step further. So over here, instead of just node, let's call node.frontMatter. And then let's build this again. Now, if you're doing this and you can't necessarily be sure that every object is going to have a front matter attached to it, which it probably will. But if for whatever reason you couldn't guarantee that, you might want some sort of condition here where you're checking for that to exist, and if not, sending back an empty object. Okay, so now I'm going to copy what came out this time. And let's take a look at this again. Format. And look, now I've got an array of these objects. And this is pretty much exactly what we want to see. This is what we want to return to the user. This is what we want to write to that JSON file. So I think we've got what we need so far. Back here, notice that I did json.stringify earworm. So really what I want to do first, I want to make sure that our directory exists. So our earworms path, that it actually exists. And I'm going to say recursive true, since now we've drilled a level deep. Okay, and let's kind of clean it up by formatting a little bit. Okay, so these few lines here, they're saying if this path public/API/earworms doesn't exist, then we're going to create it. And I didn't mention this, although I did in the previous tutorial, that we're using this FS or the file system library from Node. And eventually we'll use this path library as well. Actually, I lied. We're unlikely to need that. So let's comment that out. Now all we have to do is write that data to file. So we can do that. I'm going to steal a line from down here. I'm keeping these comments in place because we're going to use something similar here shortly. Okay, using the FS library again, we're calling write file sync, and we're going to say earworms path. So this will resolve to public/API/earworms, and then /slug. Well, actually this time we're not going to do any of that. We're just going to say earworms path.json, which means that it's going to write the file to public/API/earworms.json. And then we're going to stringify the earworms data. And I'm going to get rid of my log. And now back in the console here, let's go ahead and run it again and see what happens. So if everything went according to plan, we should see that file, and that file should have what we want in it. Okay, that build is done. So if I look in the public directory now, notice that I have an API directory, and there is an earworms directory, which we will use that. But for now, we're fine just leaving it there. And that we have an earworms.json file, and this should have everything we need. I won't format that. Instead, I'm going to run yarn serve or npm run serve. And then that is running a web server in this public directory at localhost 9000. And so notice that is that's my Gatsby project. Well, I'm looking for the API data. So that should be available at, since I'm in public, /API/earworms.json. And boom, there we go. This is the information that I wanted. This is what we had logged to the console previously. This is collecting all that front matter from those markdown files and writing it to JSON file. Boom, there we go. We're good. Perfect. Let's go one step further though. And let's say that you might also want to be able to query or load up one particular page. So instead of it being /API/earworms.json, what if I want to go to /API/earworms/1.json, or in other words, using that song ID and then appending the JSON file extension to it and getting back the data for just that particular song. Before I do that, one other thing I'll mention is that what I've done in these other tutorials is often talk a little bit about a good solid structure for an API. And notice in this case that if you were using this as an API, an actual API that could be consumed by external clients, that it's a little bit brittle. It's basically just giving back an array of objects. And so if you ever had to change the structure or introduce meta content or anything like that, that you then are very likely going to have to version the API or you're going to run into problems. So what I like to do is I like to set myself up for success and say that what we see here are the results and they are in a specific object and everything else can exist outside of it if I need anything else. So what I might do is I might say earworms data equals an object and it's got a key of results, and this is where I pass in earworms. And then I also might say I'm gonna start adding meta information here. So here's a meta object and we'll give it a count, and that will be the length of the array, which is the number of earworms that we have. So then instead of simply printing the earworms data directly, we're going to give it this structured object. And then let's run, I'm not going to clean anymore so we can move a little bit faster. Let's go ahead and run that build again. Okay, and I'll refresh my content. I'm going to look in the API directory and we're done. Let's go ahead and actually, I guess the easier thing to do would be to serve it, load it, and now here we go. So now my response is one single object. It has a results key and its value is that it's what that original response was. And then down here, I've got meta information. So that feels like a little bit of a safer structure. We've got a little bit more flexibility in there if we need to expand or add any more features down the road. Last thing before we close is now let's generate those individual JSON files. So to do that, we're going to follow something like this, but we've largely already transformed our data or really didn't even have to do much transformation. And so I'll uncomment this and we can kind of adjust what we want as we go. So here we're going to map our earworms. So again, earworms was it's that array of earworm objects. We'll use the variable earworm. We don't have to worry about generating a slug because we're going to use the song ID in this particular case. And the data we don't actually have to do anything with. Now, what we could do is we could say, well, we want to set this up for, we want to future-proof this a little bit as well. So we might say, well, we want to put the data in a result object. So we'll put the earworm there and that, yeah, I mean, I don't really know what else we would put right there at that time, but let's just say we'll do something like that. Then where we want to write it is the earworms path, which will give us, again, public API earworms, and then / not slug, but earworm.song ID. And whoops, jump down here. And then we're rendering, again, a JSON structured version of, or conversion of this data object, which came from up here. So let's save that and then run our build again. And now notice that after we build, we should eventually see 3 files in here, 1.json, 2.json, and 3.json. There they are. Let's go ahead and serve. And notice that the structure looks right, but since we've served, let's go ahead and reload our browser here. And now I can go to /1, and there we go. That's the structure I want for that one. And notice song ID 2, we've got that song, and we've got all 3. So we've now kind of set ourselves up to scale a little bit. We've got a nice structure in place, and that wasn't really all that much code to be able to build out something that's really powerful. So I suppose that about wraps us up. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of it. Again, if you want a little bit more background, because I moved kind of fast at the beginning, I would recommend checking out that JSON pages from Markdown file source tutorial. There's a written version. There's a video for a screencast version as well. Otherwise, that's it for now. I'm Sean C. Davis. I'll see you next time.